Guys and girls, welcome back to Beaumont Outlook's beginner's course into fundamentals, and today on session 4 we are covering inflation. Now, as we know, the more spending from consumers that occur in an economy, the more economic activity and output are created and generated, therefore the healthier the economy becomes. Remember the pyramid of consumers, businesses and governments? Or I should say government. Likewise, if there is less spending, i.e. consuming, done in an economy, and less economic output, then businesses are less confident and down comes inflation due to a decrease in activity in the economy, i.e. GDP. Now, what exactly is inflation and why is it the second golden brother? Remember, the first golden brother of the analogy being GDP, and now the second golden brother is inflation. We refer to these brothers as two little brothers, GDP being a little brother and inflation being a little brother. Inflation is defined as the general increase in the price of goods and services in an economy over a specific time-bound period. In FX, the timeframes we track inflation are, or I should say, the data we collect is on a monthly, quarterly and annually basis. Now, inflation. When the general price level rises in an economy, each unit of that economy's currency buys fewer goods and services. Consequently, inflation directly translates to a reduction in the purchasing power of money. This begs the question, why would the price level rise? Well, when GDP is increasing, the first little brother, more economic activity is taking place. Consumers are consuming and businesses are profiting. But at some point, this leads to an increase in demand for the goods and services inside the economy to the point where more demand is present than supply. Capitalizing on this, businesses increase their prices, consumers are earning more so they can afford the increase in price, and from here we have a growing and inflating economy. So as you can see, as GDP increases, inflation follows it. Therefore, the two little golden brothers. For example, let's put the definition of inflation into practice and see what impact it has if prices are inflated by 10% year on year in the UK. So let's say we have a 10% inflation in the UK year over year. It means a car that cost £100 to buy last year would now cost you £110 this year. In other words, prices have inflated by 10%. That £100 that consumers of the UK had last year is now essentially 10% less in value and has lost 10% of its purchasing power. Another way to look at it is that 10% inflation consequently translates and means that the £100 is quite truly worth £90 now. Theory versus application. Let's take a deeper look into the application and true effect inflation has on an economy. In theory, we know why inflation occurs. Of course, because GDP increases, spending increases, businesses are making more money, they hire more people are earning more, therefore they're spending more. But now, let us lay out the real life and application of inflation into our understanding. Inflation is the second little golden brother. We have the first, GDP, as we already know, and the second, inflation. The reason is when spending and economic activity is intense and increases in the economy, so do the prices, because they mimic one another. Now, let me apply some logic onto this. Let's say you listen to this, now own a phone shop. You sell only one model of phone, and this model is known as the Model Z. Model Z's price in January is £200. You sell out every phone in stock. February comes around, and you sell every phone in the store again. You sell 100% of your stock at £200. You notice, in fact, there is more demand for your Model Z phone than you have supply of them. Therefore, you increase the prices to £210, which is a 5% inflation on the original price. As you've noticed, consumers are in such demand for the product that they will pay slightly more to ensure they get their hands on the goods compared to others because, well, let's face it, they can afford it because they're earning more and business is good. Now in March, remember, January 200, February 200. In March, after your first increase in price, you sell 80% of your stock. But there are still some phones left over as consumers acknowledge the price increase, and of course, some consumers were turned away from purchasing this due to the increase. Nonetheless, you get greedy and raise prices again to £220. You now have inflated prices by 10% on your Model Z phones, and lo and behold, April, you only sell 50% of the stock. You pushed prices too far, and consumers are not willing to pay the price difference. Prices are not representing the value of the product, and this is what we refer to as an overinflated scenario. Now, above, the example we just discussed is exactly what central banks fear, but more about that shortly. You, the business selling Model Zs, noticed the increase in spending. In other words, you were quite literally feeling the GDP being produced, and you capitalized on the increase in demand, but took it too far with inflating prices, and this inevitably killed demand for your Model Zs. Now, why is it important to understand this? The point being made is when there are larger amounts of spending occurring in an economy, the higher prices go. The more demand exceeds supply, the higher prices go. But there is only so much a business can increase prices by before upsetting the consumer and diminishing demand. The central bank deems this rate to be 2% inflation, and that's what's known as the sweet spot for inflation to move at year over year without prices getting too hot, which is known as too expensive, or too cold, which is way too cheap. The Federal Reserve, the US Central Bank, adopted its 2% inflation target in 1996, along with the majority of the globally developed economies. After decades of peaks and troughs and tremendous amount of data collection, economists and government officials agreed that price stability, through which businesses grow and the economy simultaneously grows, whilst consumers do not feel that the wrath of inflation hit home too much, is in fact 2% inflation year over year. This became legally mandated to be achieved by the Federal Reserve and many other central banks globally, mostly developed economies, relating inflation to the economic cycle. Now, we will discuss central banks in the next session, but for now, we will focus on the correlation between GDP, the first little golden brother, and inflation, the second little golden brother. Inflation and the economic cycle are closely related, as inflation tends to rise during periods of economic expansion and fall during periods of recession. During an expansion, demand for goods and services increase, leading to an upward pressure on prices. This can cause inflation to rise. Conversely, during a recession, demand decreases, leading to a downward pressure on prices, which can cause inflation to fall. Additionally, monetary policy, such as changes in interest rates, can also impact both inflation and the economic cycle. Now, let's turn this into a visual representation and put more of a realistic application-based visual for you guys and girls. So guys and girls, here we have the economic cycle. Now, just to recap, we remember our COVID example where economies reintroduced consumers back into the economy, spending increased, economies recovered, started to expand, growth occurred, we then peak, contract, recede, hit some potential depression, trough out, and then the cycle continues. We're looking to buy these economies over here and sell the economies over here. Each economy, respectfully, will be in its phase and going through the motions at different times compared to other economies. Now, in red I have inflation, as you can see. Now, as a recovery starts to take place and consumers are spending, naturally businesses are earning more, so they're increasing their prices. And of course the economy starts to expand, and with it, so does prices. From here, we notice inflation go above the 2% central bank target, meaning prices are now getting out of hand inside of an economy and consumers are starting to notice the price change internally. This is known as above 2% is too hot and prices are essentially increasing too much. This can decrease the period that an economy will grow for and therefore increases the probability that it will peak out sooner rather than later and end up into some form of contraction or recession due to consumers not being able to afford things, can't keep up with, of course, the increase in price level in the economy, and have to then budget and be selective of how their monthly outgoings are looking. Now, once an economy peaks and spending starts to decrease, and we start to see across the whole economy GDP start to flatten, all of a sudden GDP turns negative, starts to contract, and so does it prices. GDP and inflation mimic one another, two little golden brothers. The easiest way to put it is during times of economic expansion, businesses are earning more and people can afford to pay more, businesses capitalize on this. But during times of downfall in an economy, consumers don't have much revenue, much income, businesses will acknowledge this and will like to survive the downturn in the economy, therefore lowering prices to attract and incentivize spending to get to the trough and recover out of this situation. Let's recap on all of this, the correlation between inflation and GDP. Understanding the relationship between the economic cycle and inflation is important because it allows individuals, businesses, policymakers, and traders to anticipate the plan for changes in an economy. And anticipating changes in inflation can help businesses make decisions on prices, wages, and investments, for us more so investments, while anticipating changes in the economic cycle can help policymakers make decisions on fiscal and monetary policy, whilst additionally understanding the relationship can also help individuals make decisions on saving, spending, and investing. Overall, a better understanding of the economic cycle and its relationship with inflation can lead to more informed decisions and more efficient use of resources, such as leveraging currencies in your favor. Now, I know what you're thinking, but how does GDP increasing and inflation increasing help us buy or sell currencies? All of this is coming together. For now, it's important you understand that when economies are going through phases of growth, i.e. expanding, booming, prices will also mimic this, and when economies are suffering and shrinking, prices will also follow it, like two brothers mimicking each other.